Welcome to Howling with the Wolf, the 7-7, I guess, Miami Dolphins edition. There is 2 games left in the Dolphins season, plenty more in the NFL season as we get towards holiday season, playoff time. Hope everybody's gonna have a happy Christmas, happy New Year's. We're gonna chat some football for the next 15, 20 minutes. So you guys know the deal. As always, fire away on the chat line. You guys want to know anything football wise about players across the league, NFL teams, Dolphins, whatever. Fire away question wise, and I'll do my best to answer them. As always, we'll kick it off with a few Dolphins topics. I'll hit on a few NFL topics, and then I'll give you our prediction for this week's game. So let's have some fun with it, and let's go into it. This past week was a letdown for Dolphins, and I did a hit on NFL Live, just talking about the emotions of this week, as far as what they've, the emotional spectrum from the Miami Miracle, where you're like, oh, we might be able to do something, and we knocked out the Patriots, and this is the biggest game in Dolphins history. To dang, what's going to happen next? What's the offseason looking like? And it's crazy how so much can change in the NFL as far as perspectives and how it can flip on a dime just like that. So I was just running around the locker room today just talking to guys, and you can tell the morale is a lot different than it was a week before. There's a little bit more looking around like, hey, am I going to be here in a couple of weeks? Start thinking about me. It's natural. I think guys, you start to think and you start to hear, whether it's coaches or players, start thinking about, their long-term future. As you get towards this point, the Dolphins have a 3% chance of making the playoffs per ESPN's FPI. Not very high. They're going to need a lot of help. The games in front of them aren't very difficult. They got the Jacksonville Jaguars at home this week, and then they travel at Buffalo, a place where they haven't won a ton, but that team is not great. So you could very easily see this team finishing at 9-7, but that there's still a good chance they would miss the playoffs in that scenario. So I think that these last couple weeks is going to be intriguing to see who shows up. I think ultimately this is a challenge of which players are still in it, which players have turned it off. And I think that's going to help the Dolphins determine which players they should keep for 2019 and beyond. So, I don't want to check out on the season with 2 games left because, yes, they still technically have something to play for. But let's be realistic. A lot of the thought is moving towards, okay, this season didn't go as well as we planned. What's next? What do we do to build this team, from going forward? I think that the element of change will be a big topic over the next few weeks. Whether it's at the top, through the front office, whether it's the coaching staff, whether there's moves made by Adam Gase or for Adam Gase, to get in a new coach, the quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, and then all across the roster, that's the most obvious change, that there will be things going on there. So throughout this episode, I want to talk about the element of change. That's going to be something where, what is the Dolphins' long-term future? And I look at this, sort of as a lost season, barring a crazy finish to the season where they make it to the playoffs. I know playoffs. But I think this is somewhat of a lost season because I don't think we know more about the Dolphins 9 months than we did 9 months ago. I think we know the same amount. I think there's still uncertainty about what they do at quarterback. There's still uncertainty whether Adam Gase is ultimately the answer at coach. There's still uncertainty about who the core pieces of this team are going forward. And I think that's something that has to be addressed this offseason. There has to be a line drawn in the sand and say, hey, we've got to decide who we are moving forward. Because, you can look at this team, and ultimately when I started the year, I did a prediction. I thought the Dolphins would be 8-8. A lot of people thought the same. A lot of people thought 7-9, 8-8, 9-7, 6-10. Nobody really said playoffs, and here we are. So it's not surprising. I don't think that they fell below expectations because they are exactly what everybody expected them to be, which was average. The issue is, how do you get out of mediocrity? How do you be a team that is actually thought of as one of these AFC playoff contenders, and maybe you're the Chargers or the Baltimore Ravens or those type teams, rather than being stuck in the mud with the Cleveland Browns and the teams that are muddled in the middle. You got to get out of that. So whether it's change, I know, I I see your response. Brian Byrne is asking about Matt Burke and his scheme, and he's flawed. And there's a lot of people questioning whether Matt Burke should keep his job going forward. It's not my job, at least 2 weeks left in the season, to say who should get fired and who doesn't. There's plenty of time for that. But I definitely think that Matt Burke and a lot of the coaching staffs will have to be evaluated. You look at what you've done. They're one of the worst 5 defenses in the NFL. Is their talent commensurate of that? And I think the big evaluation that the Dolphins will have to be honest with themselves with is deciding how much of this is a talent issue, how much of this is a coaching issue, how much of this is both, and how do you bridge the gap? Because for me, I think the biggest issue for the Dolphins is that there's not enough core talent pieces to lift them to the next level. But I'm not certain that this coaching staff can do it even with the talent there. I wrote an article a week or two ago that I thought that Adam Gase should return as a Dolphins coach in 2019, no matter what happens for the rest of the year. And I stand by that article. I didn't just write it and change my mind a week later. I think that he deserves another chance to be the head coach, and I know a lot of people may not agree with that, but that's my take. I think that given what the situations they've gone into, what Adam Gase has been, with over the last few years, and you look at just the potential coaches that are going to be out there, I think that it's fair to give him another chance. But the question is, how many chances do you get? And I think there's not limitless rope. And I think that ultimately he's going to have a decision to make on his coaching staff. I think that, Matt Burke, if he decides to let go of Matt Burke, maybe Vance Joseph is an option who, there's been rumblings that he's going to be out in Denver. I think that he deserves another chance as well, given that he's only had 2 years out there. But if that's the route that Denver decides to go, then maybe Adam Gase decides to reunite with his old buddy. I think Vance Joseph would obviously be a good fit here. But then the question happens that you got rid of Clyde Christensen and moved him into a different role. Adam Gase did, essentially getting a new offensive coordinator. And now you're getting rid of Matt Burke. You run out of people to blame. And ultimately, that's the dangerous area that you draw into. So I think if that's the route that the Dolphins end up going with, where they keep Adam Gase and then get rid of their DC, then everybody becomes on the hot seat on 2019 because you're basically saying that, hey, this was the issue, this was the issue. Now there's no other pieces there. Now it's on me. So I think that element is going to be something to watch. I know for the sake of Ryan Tannehill, he probably hopes that Adam Gase stays because that's his best chance of staying on this roster. Adam Gase is obviously a huge Ryan Tannehill supporter. And I think that, there's going to be a decision-making period, but who is making those decisions? Chris Grier has been the GM here for a while, and he's actually done a pretty decent job, in my opinion, drafting players. There's been some hit or misses. There's been some misses, as far as, Mike Gesicki recently, although he needs time, Charles Harris, Devontae Parker. So there's been some heavy misses, but there's also been some good hits. Xavier Howard's a drafted player, a Pro Bowl player. We're starting to see the excellence of Laramie Tunsil, who Adam Gase called the best tackle in the league. Another drafted player by Chris Grier. You've got Kenyon Drake, even though Adam Gase hasn't probably used him the way he should be used. He is another drafted player. Kalen Ballage, who's flashed, another drafted player. So I think, Jason Saunders, Jerome Baker, there's been some guys out there who contributed and could potentially Minkah Fitzpatrick, guys who could potentially be core pieces. So I think that, you got to decide, hey, do you want Chris Grier in his role? I think he's done reason enough to stay, but there could be arguments that, hey, you want to start over. And I think the only way you do that is if you're doing a full-fledged rebuild. If you're saying, hey, clean house, I think that would be the scenario there, which I don't think that should be the case here. But, you never know. You never know what Steve Ross is thinking after another, mediocre 8-8, 9-7, 7-9, whatever they finish season. Then the other option is Mike Tannenbaum. He's the guy who's handing out the contracts. And, there's a lot of albatross contracts on this roster, whether it's Robert Quinn, who got traded for, and you got to make a decision on him. Andre Branch is probably the biggest one, and I'm guessing that he's probably going to be one of the first people out of the door. And then you'll have to decide what you're going to do with the safeties. Rashad Jones and T.J. McDonald, it's tough to get out of their contract. But, you got Minkah Fitzpatrick. Where does he play? There's a lot of question marks about this roster, and there's a lot of holes in this roster. And you haven't even got into the conversation of quarterback. and whether you draft another guy. So I think this is going to be an extremely important offseason. We're going to learn what direction the Dolphins are going. And although there are 2 games left, I think it's fair for us to look around, because that's what the Dolphins are doing in their locker room and saying, are you going to be there? Are you going to be there? Are you going to be there? Am I going to be there? I think all these questions are reasonable, and I think that's what the Dolphins base, you guys, want to know at this point, because them going 8-8, them going 9-7 will not change their long-term future. Ultimately, they're going to be who they are. So let me go ahead and get to a few of you guys' questions on this and answer those. I'll jump into an NFL topic or two, and then we'll start talking about this week's game. Um, let's see. Brian Byrne is saying, why doesn't Matt Burke know his scheme is flawed? It's funny you mentioned that. Coaches are prideful guys, and my big thing as a reporter is always like, for the most part, 99% of the times, coaches are going to be more knowledgeable and better positioned to make football decisions than I am. And I know that. I grew up playing football. I think I know football pretty well. But these guys know more than me. So I try my best, and I could be wrong on this, but I try my best to not criticize their decision making. Don't burn up the house, wife. um, sorry, guys. It's a little alarm here. Hopefully, you guys can still hear me. My wife is cooking dinner. But yes, I think that Matt Burke talked about it today, and his thought is that he's not making unsound schemes. And you guys could disagree. I haven't looked into it deep enough to figure out exactly whether it's a scheme or player issue or both. But I think the overall issue with Matt Burke's defense is that whatever his scheme is and whatever the players want to run and what they're good at are not aligned. And whether that's a Matt Burke issue, whether that's a player issue, player personnel issue, regardless, that needs to be addressed. You can't have a defensive coordinator running things that are not appropriate for his players, and you can't have players that are not able to do what's good for the scheme that he's putting out there. So you've got to figure out that balance, and that may be if Matt Burke's back, trying to self-evaluate himself and say, hey, what can I do to adjust? I think adjustment's a very important word, particularly when you're talking about Matt Burke, is because, I think that a lot of times we've seen games from him that we've seen the defense really excel, and then we've seen other times where they're sort of stagnant. So I think adjustment would be helpful, particularly with the Rashad Jones situation. There was communication issues earlier in there. He had a comment today about Rashad Jones and said Rashad Jones never told him what he told the media on Monday, which is that he feels like he's better in the box instead of free safety. These are things that need to be communicated. We shouldn't be the conduits for how the players feel about issues. Rashad Jones' frustration shouldn't be first heard from the media. Rashad Jones thinking that he is being misused out of position shouldn't be heard through the media. So whether that's a Rashad Jones needs to talk to Matt Burke issue or Matt Burke needs to be more open issue, I don't know. But ultimately, I think the communication between the coach and players has an impact on how they're playing on the field. I don't know if this how good this defense would be with a different defensive coordinator or better communication. I think there are still some huge talent gaps on this team. They can't stop the run for the life of them, and a lot of that's, their front seven play. And I don't think that has anything to do with coaching. I think that has to do with guys just not being good enough to be able to stop the run. But ultimately, that's a decision that, like we said, changed. That's a decision you got to make. Matt Burke's a good dude. I like him. I like conversating with him. But that's not going to win you football games, So that's one decision that has to be made. Jason, I think he might end up with ESPN at some point. Jason Leisure moved from us, and we miss you in the media room, Jason. He's out there doing bigger and better things up in Chicago and Chi-Town, covering the Chicago Blackhawks out there. So, Jason's a good dude, and appreciate the love. So, let me see what else you guys have for me. Paul, you hit it on the nail. We have no idea about this team. We have no idea how good Tanny is or isn't. That's where I'll disagree. We know what Ryan Tannehill is. Ryan Tannehill is precisely Ryan Tannehill. He's a very, very average to above average quarterback. I think that we've had enough time to evaluate Ryan Tannehill. The Dolphins may not feel like they have, but whether through injuries or not, I think that Ryan Tannehill will have his peaks and valleys. He'll have extremely strong games like the New England game, and then he'll have stinkers like the Minnesota game. And ultimately, the the thing here is that I do not want to have a situation where everything has to be perfect for my quarterback to succeed. Yes, the offensive line really struggled last week, but there were situations that Ryan could have better positioned himself to get rid of the football, to find his hot, to communicate on the line so that they're well positioned for the blitzes that are coming in. These are all quarterback's responsibility, particularly in the seventh year. So I think that Ryan Tannehill deserves a lot of credit for his toughness, a lot of credit for being able to rally teams and come through in the clutch in certain situations. But there are a lot of things that he has not excelled in, and ultimately the team's going to have a decision on whether they feel like what they're getting out of Ryan Tannehill is good enough. And I don't think that we need more time to find out what Ryan Tannehill is. I think that we know what Ryan Tannehill is. So that's just my take. Let's see what we got here. More questions. Brian saying, doesn't there need to be front office need to change? There has to be accountability for the flawed talent. Again, I'm not going to call for Mike Tannenbaum or Chris Greer's job or anybody else in that front office. I think there are different levels of culpability and the blame. And whether you want to blame Tannenbaum for the contracts, whether you want to blame him for the free agents they're bringing in or losing, whether you want to blame Chris Greer for the guys that drafted, that's you guys, right and ability to judge. I do know that you've got to look at the personnel. And for me, when I look at this Miami Dolphins team and their roster, it's an average roster at best. I think that they were given an average roster. They have an average quarterback. They're having average production. So I know there's a lot of blame to the coaching staff, and some of it's warranted, on different levels, whether it's defense, whether it's offense, and Adam Gase and whatever. There's a lot of blame to be warranted. But for me, I look at an average team roster-wise that was turned into an average team record-wise. I think that's simply what it is. So, maybe you criticize Adam Gase for not getting more, creating the average talent to good team. And maybe you criticize the personnel for not giving them better than average talent. But I just see averageness all around. You got to figure out what areas can we make good to great, and then really stress and focus on those areas. So that's where I am for that. Let's see. Bree, I'm just seeing some of you guys' comments on there. Yeah, my wife is lovely. She made my graphics for the Howling with the Wolf. If you guys are wondering, these graphics down here, the video that comes in, that's all my wife. So shout out to her. Hopefully my food isn't burnt. Let's see. Paul is saying way too many players are playing out of position. This roster's flawed. Who's in charge of the roster? I mentioned that a little earlier. There is a three-man sort of, hierarchy here with the Dolphins. Adam Gase is obviously the coach. He has 53-man roster control. Mike Tannenbaum is typically in control of the contracts and signing players as the executive vice president of football operations. And Chris Greer is mostly in charge of drafting players. I don't have the full outline of how they cross and how they kind of get in, but essentially that's the basics of what I know of how that thing's run. So that sort of tells you that they're all in charge of the roster in different ways. So are our players Drake, Stills, and Jones getting restless being underused? And this is a question from Brian. He's been active today. Appreciate the questions, Brian. I love when y'all have questions for me, so that gives me a chance to rap a little bit. King and Drake, he's trying to be straight with us, but we've kind of seen some of the things crack over the last couple weeks for him. I would say that he is frustrated, and he's trying his best not to show it, but he thought he was going to be the guy. And whether you agree or not with Adam Gase's use of Frank Gore over King and Drake, I think early in the season I was a little bit more, why isn't King and Drake on the field? And then as I saw Frank Gore's production, I thought, it makes sense, but still find a way to get King and Drake the ball. And he does lead the team with 9 touchdowns, but King and Drake is always going to be a puzzling thing for a lot of people. But I understand Adam Gase's perspective, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. He just believes that he likes guys he can trust, and too often he feels like he can't trust King and Drake in all situations. So I know it's got to be frustrating for King and Drake, particularly seeing a guy like Kalen Ballage, a rookie, come in and get more touches than him when Frank's actually hurt. And I think that Kalen Ballage will end up having a big role over these next couple of weeks. But he's got to handle it what it is, and maybe he improves on the areas that Adam Gase wants to improve on him, or maybe he just never succeeds in Miami. Maybe it's just never not a good fit, and the Dolphins end up having to trade him. That's a very real possibility. As far as Stills, I think a lot of that is not having pass protection. Kenny's also struggled to get off the line and beating press coverage as well, and I think that he would tell you that. But there have been times that he's open. He had a big game against was it New England? Either New England or the game before, he had his huge breakout game. So he shows that he can still do it. They just need the time, and they've got to have the ability to have a connection between he and Ryan. So I think Kenny is an ability of on-field production rather than coaches not using a particular player. And Rashad Jones, I mentioned it earlier with Matt Burke. That's communication. You got to figure out how to use your best players. I know Rashad's got a shoulder injury. I don't know if that had an impact on why he's playing back and free instead of strong. But I think the biggest thing is that they have two safeties, and T.J. McDonald and Rashad Jones, that are essentially similar players. They're both strong safeties, and I don't know if that's a Mike Tannenbaum, a Chris Greer, or Adam Gase issue, but they signed two players to long-term deals that essentially play the same position. And they both are best when they play closer in the box. So how do you have two box safeties playing both starting positions? That's when you have the issues. Somebody's either going to be unhappy or less effective in their role. So I think eventually Minkah Fitzpatrick will play one of those safety positions, and they're going to have to make a decision on whether they get rid of Rashad Jones or T.J. McDonald or move one of them into a secondary role. The issue is it's going to be difficult to get out of either of those contracts. So that's another offseason move and decision they have to make. How do we get Paul's asking? How do we get production from a tight end in this offense? You got to have a tight end you trust at first. Mike Gesicki, let's just be frank, has been a disappointment. He hasn't given them much of anything. Definitely not as a blocker and not even as a passer. So that's been a huge whiff. Mike Gesicki and Durham Smythe haven't contributed much of anything for this season. So they got to find a tight end. Whether they wait on Mike Gesicki or they go get one, they got to find a tight end. Luis Velasquez. And I'll kind of use this to transition into some NFL talk. I've been going wild for 20 minutes of Dolphins talk. Thank you guys. You guys have been lively today. Probably one of my more lively chats as far as Dolphins questions that I've had in weeks. So appreciate y'all on that. It's always fun to kind of get different perspectives and different topics. So I'm going to go shift a little bit to NFL as a whole, and then we're going to go back to Dolphins, give a prediction, talk about the game, and we'll get out of here so I can eat some dinner. So thanks as always, guys. Luis Velasquez has a couple questions, one Titans related and one Pro Bowl related, and we'll go ahead and knock those out. Thoughts on Pro Bowl snubs? I'm going to give you 3 names, and actually we're gonna do 5 names. 3 for teams that I've covered, 1 from each of the teams that I've covered before, and then 2 other ones actually from the same team. My 2 from the same team that I've never covered before, both from the AFC South. I think Andrew Luck should have made the Pro Bowl over Tom Brady. I think he's been a better player this year. I think he's been a Pro Bowl caliber player, and I was surprised to see that. But, it's a popularity contest in a sense, some way. And Darius Leonard, the Indianapolis Colts linebacker, I think he has been arguably the best linebacker in football this year. He is probably Defensive Player of the Year in my mind. Defensive Rookie Player of the Year, and it's a shame that he didn't make the Pro Bowl. So I was just shocked by that. And then my other 3, out in Denver, which I covered for 2 years, Chris Harris Jr., I think that should have made the Pro Bowl. I think that he's one of the more underrated cornerbacks in the NFL, and it's just, he doesn't get the love that he deserves because he has to play a lot of slot corner. He may not be the biggest guy. He doesn't get a ton of interceptions, but he's a game changer. And you ask quarterbacks across the league, you ask offensive coordinators across the league, and they will tell you that Chris Harris is somebody that they know very well. So he's number 2. He's number 1 as far as things I covered. Number 2 on the Titans, Kevin Byard, safety out of Tennessee, all-pro player last year, led the league in interceptions last season. His interception numbers aren't as high this season, but he's played just as good as a year in my mind. I haven't watched every game, but probably watched 6 or 7 this year. And from the ones I've seen, he's been a game-changing player. He's a top 5 safety in my mind and a top 3 safety in the AFC, and he should have been in the Pro Bowl too. So those are 2 guys as well. And then number three for the Dolphins, Laramie Tunsil, I believe, should have been in the Pro Bowl. And Adam Gase, said that he was shocked that he wasn't because he feels like he's the best tackle in the league. The thing I know about Pro Bowl is typically you get in 1 year after you're supposed to get in. It takes teams, the league, fans a year to know players who they are before they can truly vote for them. So I think Laramie Tunsil is a Pro Bowl player next year if he keeps up the same caliber of play. But I think he had a Pro Bowl year this year, and he should have got in over Eric Fisher, the offensive tackle out of Kansas City. So those are my Pro Bowl snubs. Titans covers from your time covering the Titans. Is this the finally a Derrick Henry we all thought he would be? It's funny, I was chopping it up with King and Drake in the locker room, and he said this is the guy I saw in Alabama all the time. So I'm not shocked. The thing about Derrick Henry is that you have to build your offense around Derrick Henry. He's the type of running back where he's a power back. He needs the rock. He needs some things to get churning. So you can't make him like, hey, I'm gonna give you 8 carries, and when you don't do what I want, you're not playing well. He needs to get rolling. He needs the ball. He needs to be a fourth quarter closer. That's what he does best. And I think we've seen Matt LaFleur, the coordinator out there in Tennessee, do an excellent job of figuring out how to adjust his offense to his personnel. And I think that's one of the biggest compliments of a coach. Can you adjust your scheme to what the talent you have? They had a team. They started to go a little pass happy earlier this year, and then they realized that Derrick Henry and his run game was what they were most effective at, and then they scrapped it. It hurt Corey Davis's touches. It didn't let them see a lot of their quarterback in Marcus Mariota, but they started to win, and that's what matters. So I think that Derrick Henry has his flaws. He may always have his flaws, but we're seeing some of the best out of him, and I think that's a credit to Matt LaFleur. Let's see what we got. Thank you guys for all these questions. I'm going to churn through a few of these very quickly so everybody gets an answer. And then I'm going to talk about the contenders that I believe are really good guys to bet on as far as Super Bowl contenders. And then I'll give you my predictions and my X Factor. So let's go from there. Let's see. Alex DuPont is saying, does Miami target a quarterback in the draft or a player like Bridgewater? My perspective is you draft a quarterback in one of the first 3 rounds, preferably one of the first 2 rounds, preferably the first round, and you let him compete with Ryan Tannehill, or if you must get rid of him, another veteran for that starting job when he's ready. So my thought is keep Tannehill for 2019, draft a quarterback, first or second round, and let him compete. Bridgewater is a really talented, intriguing prospect, but he hasn't played significant football in 3 years. You've got to teach him a new scheme, and even when he did play, he wasn't significantly better than Ryan Tannehill. So I don't know if I put all my hands in the marbles on Teddy Bridgewater. I'm not as high on him as a lot of people were. So it's Matt Burke and Nathan Peterman of defensive coordinators. Come on, Brian. I don't know if I go that far. He's had some good games. Brian said, next year, can you do this at 7:30? 8 was tough with Thursday Night Football. Yeah, I actually moved it around a couple times. 7:30 might be that sweet time, and we'll play around with days or times. And, obviously you guys give me feedback on this. I was at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and I heard some feedback that it was a little too early for some folk, particularly in the Central Time Zone and the Mountain Time Zone where people have been following me at. So I moved it back to 8 p.m. over the last few weeks. And then obviously today there's no Thursday Night Football. So I felt like I could, I got a little meaty chat for you guys. Usually it's 15, 20 minutes, but I'm almost 30 minutes in. So, maybe 7:30 is that sweet zone. And thank you for the feedback, and I'll look into that. Paul Bucci Hiller, hopefully I pronounced that right, is saying, do you think we need bigger, more physical receivers? Parker's not good. I think we are looking at the last 2 games of Devontae Parker. Yes, you could use more physical and big receivers, but the entire league does. So good luck trying to find them at the right price. Luis Velasquez says, best guess who gets the last playoff spot in the AFC. I'll go ahead and answer this, and I'll give you my contenders for best Super Bowl contenders and contenders that you can trust in January. Last playoff spot, I think it ultimately is going to end up coming. The 3 teams, sorry Dolphins fans, but the 3 teams is the Ravens, the Titans, and the Colts. I think it's going to come down to Week 17, Titans versus Colts. I think Titans and Colts both win this week, and whoever wins that last game, Titans versus Colts, I think they end up making the playoffs. And Andrew Luck's been really tough to beat. That defense is surging. The Titans have struggled to beat the Colts and Andrew Luck and Indy. I'm going to say is the Colts. I think the Colts get the final playoff spot. And then teams to trust. Team to trust come playoff time. I think, and I think I made a Super Bowl prediction earlier, and about a month or a month and a half ago on this chat. And I think the team that is really intriguing me over the last few weeks, and I think they have a chance to really shock a lot of people and win the Super Bowl, is the Los Angeles Chargers. I was really impressed over what I saw against them against Kansas City Chiefs. I think they have a great coach, probably the coach of the year in my mind, in Anthony Lynn. He's a credence for what you should allow as far as running back coaches getting a head job. There's so much talk, and I did an article about this in the Denver Post a year ago about coaches and being close to the quarterback. And you've got to get a hot quarterback coach and a hot guru and Josh McDaniels and Kyle Shanahan. And all these guys may be really good at what they do, but there are other ways to find coaches. There are other gyms and that you can find that don't have the same background as other coaches. So Anthony Lynn's a perfect example of that. He waited years and years for his opportunity, and now he's killing it in Los Angeles. And I think they're one of the two teams that I think that are going to be representing the Super Bowl this year. That's my pick. I think the Patriots are down, especially with Josh Gordon out of there. I think that the Los Angeles Chargers are a better team than Kansas City Chiefs, and I think they're the go-to team in the Super Bowl. And I think that's the team that I would trust the most. So that's the team I would trust the most on the AFC side. On the NFC side, I think the Chicago Bears defense is really scary. My issue is, do they have enough with Mitchell Trubisky and that offense to keep it up? But that is a team that I would try to trust, particularly if they get some home games come playoff time. But ultimately, New Orleans Saints are that team that I think that right now will represent the NFC in that championship. And I think they're another team you can trust. I'm not really buying the LA Rams as much as I was earlier this year. I've seen them get exposed a little bit on the recent games. And I've got to see them play tough football on the road for me to really trust them. So I think they're a scary team. Obviously, they have a lot of talent. They're probably the most talented team in the NFC, but it's tough for me to trust them. One team to watch out for, if they find a way in the playoffs, is I think the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Nick Foles has been a special player in December, January, and February. So if they find a way in, nobody's going to want to play them. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. I'm excited to see what happens over these last 2 weeks. Who gets home field advantage? Who's going to be the go-to teams? I'm going to fire through the rest of you guys' questions. My prediction for this week is Dolphins 17, Jaguars 13. Slugfest, snoozer. Hopefully, I get more entertainment out of that game than I'm predicting. But I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think that it's going to be tough for points to go by. But I think the Dolphins get a victory at home where they're 6-1 this season, and I think they get 2 or 3 interceptions off Cody Kessler, and they get a good game from Kalen Ballage and Kingman Drake. So that's my thoughts on that. X factor in this game, number 1, Kalen Ballage. I wrote a story on him on ESPN.com Thursday. Go check it out about how his patience and lessons from Frank Gore prepared him for this opportunity. He had 8 carries for 11 yards coming into last week's game. He had that big 123-yard performance, 75-yard rushing touchdown. A lot of talent, a big, fast guy, and we really get a chance to see how that Kalen Ballage, Kenyon Drake duo works. I hope Frank Gore comes back. I hope he comes back to Miami. But this is the Dolphins' chance to see their 2 young running backs and how they work together. So Kalen Ballage is my number 1 X factor in this game. My number 2 X factor, and I actually had a long conversation with him in the locker room, is Torrey McTyer. It's looking like T.J. McDonald will be out this week. There could be possibly a move of Minkah Fitzpatrick back to safety, and what that could mean is that you get, if Xavier Howard returns, then yes, he plays out there. Bobby McCain's going to be more of the other spot, but then Torrey McTyer becomes a significant player as your number 3 cornerback, and he has in recent weeks played pretty decent. So how does he play? This week, can he hold up? And I think this is a chance for him to gain some confidence. Early in the season, teams were picking on him, but you got a weak quarterback in there. Can you gain some confidence with a play like Torrey McTyer? And number 3 X factor in this game will be the Jaguars' offensive line. They have 4 backup offensive linemen starting, including Eric Flowers, who should not be starting anywhere near an offensive line. How do the Dolphins perform against them? How do they handle themselves? Leonard Fournette's obviously going to be a big part of this game, and I think that's my final X factor for this. So that's my thoughts on this week's game. Hopefully it's more entertaining And for Dolphins fans, hopefully some magic happens. Tennessee or Indianapolis loses, and maybe there's playoff talk next week, or we'll have another week talking about who should go and who should stay. That's cool too. So I'll fire away on the rest of you guys' questions, and I'll end this chat. As always, subscribe to my page. Share with your fellow Dolphins fans, your friends. I have a YouTube page that I post these videos to after. Um, really appreciate y'all showing me love. It's a chance for me to give you guys some unique thoughts that I don't share on .com, and hopefully give you guys some insight that you don't get anywhere else. So, Brian, I just answered your question with Minka and TJ. My thought is that yes, Minka will play free safety with TJ out. Dustin Heaton is saying, do you think there are internal issues with Gase? Every player that leaves him blasts him. I don't know if I go that far. I think that Adam Gase is obviously a very expressionable coach. I think that he's very certain on who he likes and who he doesn't like. I think players are a little taken aback that he's not fake. So I think I like that part of him, that it's not fake, but it could backfire on him like we've seen with previous coaches. So that's my thought on that reaction. So why not move Gesicki to receiver? Because he's not fast enough to be a receiver. And Brian saying, thank you for the chat and for the professionalism on the Dolphins beat. Appreciate you guys, man. Dolphins fan base is a different one for me. I've covered the Broncos fan base, which is rabid and huge, and I covered the Titans fan base, which is smaller, but they care about it too. And you guys are all spread out. It's a very culture-centric area, so it's a good fan base. I'm getting to know you guys well, and I know there's a lot of past history, past success in here with Dan Marino and those guys. And hopefully while I'm here, I'll get to cover a team that makes some noise in the playoffs. Cross my fingers on that. We'll see. And yeah, Jason, I talked about you earlier. Clearly, you didn't hang around through the chat because I talked about my friend Jason Leisure and how I am sad to miss him and how he's doing great things for the Blackhawks in Chicago. So thanks as always, you guys, and see you back here next week.